There are the introverts and the extroverts. So basically, extroverts are the people that are confident about making mistakes. It's not that they don't care. They do care about, speaking in a right way, not making mistakes. But at the same time, if they do make mistakes, they basically don't make this like a big deal.
Welcome back, language learners. This is Daniel, the host of this show, in which we try to inspire you and give you some advice for your language learning journey. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we are gonna have an interview with Leo. Leo is a very passionate language learner from Italy. He really knows his stuff, and it seems to me that his methods worked out quite well, as you will notice, by listening to this interview. So we scratched the surface of various topics, such as Leo's English learning journey, the beginning of his German learning journey, extensive and intensive reading, learning with podcasts, learning a language by having fun, making errors in the process of learning, very important, and many more things. So enjoy the interview. Oh, and by the way, this episode is again part of the Brave 85 series. For more information, check out for episode 84. But now, without any further ado, let's get to the interview. Hey, what's up, Leo? How are you doing?
Hi, hello, Daniel. How are you? I'm fine, thanks. And you?
I'm fine. I am really glad that you made it to my Fluent podcast. Thank you very much, Leo.
Well, thank you too for having me. I'm quite happy to be here.
So, could you please introduce yourself and give us some background info?
Well, yeah, sure. I am a Lapser, as you know, as you are. I've always wanted to learn English. I'm from Italy, and I started learning English so late in life that I don't really know why. So LEP, the Luke's English podcast, was like, a treasure to me. So I started from there.
And which was your very first episode that you came across? Do you remember
Actually, yeah, sure. I was Googling something on the internet because I wanted to find something to listen to. And I started Googling something with learning English online or, I don't know, videos or radio programs and stuff like that. And I stumbled upon Luke's English podcast because I found an episode about the podcast from which I don't really remember the number of the episode. But, basically, I listened to that one, and then I went back to episode 1 and started listening from there, from episode 1.
Hello and welcome to Luke's English Podcast, the podcast for learners of English. This is the very first podcast that I've done, and it will be the first of many more podcasts that you'll be able to download and listen to in the future. Let's see. First of all, my name's Luke, Luke Thompson. Now, the name Luke can be a little bit difficult for learners of English to pronounce sometimes, and I meet lots of people who can't pronounce my name, and they call me Look or maybe Luck, but it's not Look or Luck. It's Luke, of course. Let's see.
I just went on and on till 700.
Oh, I see. So, do you have a specific goal in mind when it comes to learning English?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do. I have several goals. For example, I think that the most important thing is just, to have fun and to communicate with people. I really like to meet people from all around the world, native speakers, and also people from other countries that have learned English. And it is quite interesting to me to communicate and to have the opportunity to communicate with all these people. And for the English language, my goal would be to to be fluent, of course, because this is something that I really care about. And I would love to improve in the four skills, reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But of course, I lack a lot of practice in speaking because where I live, there aren't so many native speakers. So
I see. Yeah, it's the same here. So what I need more is practice, speaking practice. So you told me that you want to become fluent. Does it mean to you fluent in speaking or fluent in writing, or does it consist of every part of the language? What exactly does it mean to you to be fluent in English?
Well, first of all, in speaking. By this, I mean that I would love, to be able to use the language without thinking. And this is something that you get only by practicing the language. And well, as I said, I don't get so many opportunities to speak the language with other people. So when I communicate in English, sometimes I get blocked. I stumble upon words, and there are times where I really have to concentrate to think about what to say, which word to use, and stuff like that. But writing is also really important. This is something that I really want to master even more, because writing gives you the opportunity, to think about what you are writing, what you are trying to say or to express by writing, of course. And but of course, you have all the time that you need to think and to elaborate and to see if what you are expressing is right, grammar-wise, and also in the kind of expressions and ways to express your thoughts,
Yeah, I see.
And it also depends on what you're trying to communicate, to express, and also which kind of text you are writing. For example, if you are writing emails, if you are writing a novel, or maybe you are just writing on WhatsApp to one of your friends. It depends.
Yeah, this is quite interesting because, you mentioned in your audio message in the competition, you mentioned that 80% of the English that you learn comes basically from Luke's English podcast. So it is input based. But you mentioned that for you, it is really important to become fluent in speaking and also writing. But nevertheless, you have an input based learning strategy. Could you maybe explain why you chose that method?
Well, I chose the input-based language learning because I think that in language learning, it is really, really important to do, for the most at least, to do what you like. So, and something that I really like doing is listening to podcasts and, just spending time with the language. This means, of course, movies, learning by reading books, by basically getting exposure to the language. And, but also with this, it is so important to speak. I mean, fluency is something that I really believe that is important at least at some point in your language learning experience, because the most important thing is just to get across to the other person. You just need to communicate. As Luke says, it is not about perfection, but about communication, about connection. So, and this is something that I really share, and I really believe that it is important to keep in mind while speaking a language, because you start speaking a language not just because you need it, but also because you want to communicate with other people, you want to have fun. It's all about the experiences that you can get from speaking, in this case, English. But it goes for every language that you are learning, in my opinion. It is
Yeah.
quite, but it is quite important, to keep in mind to have a very exact view of the reasons why you're learning a language. And well, as I said, having fun is, in my opinion, one of the first reasons.
And why did you choose to participate in the WISBOLEP competition? So was it just to have fun, or did you have to come out of your comfort zone maybe?
Well, the WISBOLEP competition was something that I really wanted to participate in because, since I discovered this podcast in 2016, I don't know, I always hoped to be able to have a conversation with Luke. It would have been really nice for me, a nice experience, something really enjoyable. And of course, back in 2016, I wouldn't have been able to keep a conversation with anyone because I wasn't able to speak English, and also understanding the language was quite difficult back then. Well, basically, as you said, the WISBOLEP competition. In order to participate in that competition, I had to step out of my comfort zone. Of course, I had to, because being confident while speaking another language, I think that is something that really is shared between all the English learners. Because, of course, if you have been studying the language for like, I don't know, 6 months maybe, or maybe even less, at that stage of the learning process, it is quite difficult to be confident. I know many people who have struggled for learning English. Well, basically, they all told me the same thing, that when you are a beginner and also intermediate or upper intermediate levels, they always struggle with the spoken language because being confident is something that is not shared by everyone, because there are two kinds of learners. There are the introverts and the extroverts. So basically, extroverts are the people that are confident about making mistakes. It's not that they don't care. They do care about speaking in a right way, not making mistakes. But at the same time, if they do make mistakes, they basically don't make this like a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They just like to learn from their mistakes, and they basically learn by making mistakes, by error. And well, the introverts are like me, for example, are the people that like to start speaking the language after many months or maybe years of studying it,
Yeah.
when you have already acquired a very big passive knowledge of the language. But at the same time, speaking should be something that you do from the get-go. This is my opinion. Why? Just because English is a tool, as Luke said many times. This is something that you use. Of course, it's never gonna be perfect, but it doesn't matter. You just have to go out there, get out of your comfort zone, and just start speaking. Making mistakes doesn't matter, but just have fun while speaking with people, and you will eventually get better.
And do you think for the beginners, is it a good method to record themselves maybe because they are intimidated to speak up in the beginning? So maybe they could just record themselves to get their practice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do. This is something that I also do sometimes. I think that this is an exercise that is quite good at any stage of the learning process. Because when you record yourself, you start noticing all the mistakes that you do, maybe you want something that you would like, to improve, maybe something about pronunciation, or maybe about grammar, or the way that you express yourself. I mean, there are many things that, you could really take count of. And basically, by listening to yourself speaking, you get a view from the outside. I mean, how do you sound to other people? This is something that we don't really get the opportunity. We don't always get the opportunity to, to get, because it is very important to be clear. In my opinion, this is the most important thing. When you speak English, the other people should understand what you're saying, what you're trying to communicate. Well, yeah, basically that was to say that yes, I do agree with this kind of exercises. It is quite useful at any stage.
Okay, yeah. I think that you really know what you are talking about. I mean, you are obviously a great language learner, and I am curious if you ever if you ever had the idea to start out your own podcast, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did. And that's because I discovered Luke's English podcast, of course. I mean, Luke was the one who inspired me on so much on the language learning process, on all of this, basically. Having my own podcast, or as I was thinking also about, maybe a YouTube channel or something, just something that I could do in English. Maybe not alone. It would have also be very nice to have the opportunity to do something with maybe another learner as me, or maybe a native speaker. I don't know. It also depends on what kind of subjects we're gonna be, treated on this podcast or channel. The reason why it sounds like that I know stuff about how to learn English is just because I have read so many articles, I've watched so many videos also on the psychology of language learning, because this is something that I'm really passionate about. I really like not only to learn the language, but also to make it as fun as possible, something that you really enjoy doing. So this is why, for example, sometimes I had the opportunity to use the language for like maybe 3-4 hours. I mean, for a native speaker, maybe this sounds like a joke, but for me, that's like maybe 2-3 years ago, I wasn't even able to keep up with the listening part. Let's just not speak about the spoken language, because for me,
Yeah.
it was like a nightmare, really a nightmare. And then, I started learning also and reading also about how to cope with the psychological part, because you're gonna fail. Basically, that's the thing. This is something that we should all accept. We are gonna fail so many times by making mistakes, of course, but in the end, it's not a big deal. This is something that it is normal to the learning process, something that you shouldn't really care about. You should start learning from your mistakes, but they shouldn't get to you, because I used for example, especially at the beginning, I used to get, like so self-conscious about my mistakes that I always used to get blocked, to stumble
Yeah.
upon words, to, not being able to say neither two words in the language. I don't know, for a reason or another, I was blocked at that point. For like the first 2 years of my English learning were like a nightmare to me, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to focus more on the exposure to the language,
I
just by
see.
reading
Yes.
and
Yes.
listening.
Have you ever heard about Stephen Krashen?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's kind of a legend,
Yeah.
on the learning community. And I've studied some of his articles, and I really, really like his work. Basically, this is one of the reasons why I decided that I should do more reading, because reading now is like for me the key, for cracking the code, basically to understand how the English language works. And the more you read, the more you develop, you develop so many things, your vocabulary, your understanding of the language, your grammar, because you get so much exposure. And also the written word is so much more complicated than the spoken word, because the way that we speak also in our native languages, of course. For example, as for me in Italian, when I speak, I use a really small range of words. But if I read a book in Italian or in any language, the number of words that are gonna be used in that text, like maybe, let's do an example, The Lord of the Rings. If I were to read The Lord of the Rings in English, I would be exposed to a very huge amount of words, right? But if we speak, we use like a small percentage of that amount.
Of course, and then you focus on the new vocabulary words and you try to learn them, or how can you remember by just reading to a lot of content?
Well, and that is really something interesting, because this is something that I like to do, and to keep this practice of extensive reading and intensive reading, and the same can be applied to listening. What I mean by this is that extensive reading and listening is basically something that you do for very long periods of time. So basically you start listening to something and you just enjoy it, as long as you want. You like a book, you start reading this book, and over time, you get so much exposure to the language just by reading or listening. But when you do the intensive reading or listening part, basically you just focus on a very small part of the text, maybe a page, maybe 2 pages, or maybe a very small section of an episode of a podcast. You start listening to 3 minutes of this podcast, and also if you have the transcript, it is even better. You focus on the language that is used in this particular part, and you start examining the language. You start noticing all the different grammar points. You start noticing all the different words that are used, or the expression, the idioms. Maybe you start also trying to get the vibe that this particular kind of text that you are trying to study is giving you. So it is quite important to do both of them, in my opinion. Exposure just by a longer period of hours, just by, I don't know. It also depends on you, on how much time you have, for example.
And how about you? What do you prefer? Or do you do both methods equally?
Well, no, in my opinion, it is almost impossible to do them equally, because, extensive, let's just take the listening part. If I were to listen, for example, to an episode that lasts for about 2 hours, I could listen to the episode, but starting to examine the entirety of this episode would be really something long. It would take ages. So no, this is something that you do only for a particular part of the episode, like maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes. In my case, I usually go with 3 minutes.
Okay, and do you use the transcripts of Luke's English podcast, or do you just listen to it and maybe you write it down, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, well, with LEP, I usually just listen to the episode, and then from there, I try to write down everything that I listen to. After this, if I have the transcript of the episode. I will just check that what I have written is correct. But, apart from that, I think that the most important thing that you really need to do is just having fun. So this is something that takes a really, a little bit more of focus, concentration, and, this is hard work. It also depends on which are your goals. For example, if you want, for example, like me, if you would like, to get better over a smaller period of time, I think that this is something that should be, done, because it really boosts your English.
Okay, great. By any chance, do you have any recommendations when it comes to reading a book?
So there are many books that are graded for English learners that are really useful, because the number of words and also the grammar that is used in these books are different from A1 level, A2 level, and then all the way up to C1 and C2 level. And these are graded reads. Like, for example, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago, I bought a book that is rated for C2 levels, and you get the CD, the audio recording, of course, with the book itself, and paperback. And they are divided in different levels, and they are quite good for language learners, because you get exposed to something that is not, not too much difficult for you. Because it is quite important to choose something that is suited for your level. A little bit above your level. Not like, for example, if I were on A2 level, I wouldn't read something for C1 level.
Sure.
Because it would be so tiring. I would get tired and maybe bored, and I wouldn't stick to it. So, and this is why I said that you should do something that you like. For example, I know people that prefer watching videos with subtitles, like watching movies with or without subtitles, and then over time get better just by using those. In my case, I prefer to get exposure to a wider range of materials, like, for example, as I said, of course, books, movies, and of course podcasts. So as we all know, LP is my favorite one. And yeah, all those things combined together, using all these kind of methods also allow you to get exposure to different patterns, different grammar points. I just wanted to mention that if I don't really get a grammar point, if I have difficulties on getting something and read not only the meaning, also how it is used in which ways something can be used, like a grammar point. In that case, I'm gonna refer to a grammar book, like, for example, English Grammar in Use, that I think every language learner knows.
Yeah.
And yeah. And also, also online, there are many websites that can really give you, a hand when it comes to grammar, pronunciation, on all these things.
Do you know about the internet page called Youglish?
Youglish? No, I
Yes.
don't. Actually, I don't.
It's a website which gathers actually YouTube videos. You can type in, for example, and then it shows you all the videos in which people speak, for example. And then you can learn the different ways how people are expressing, for example, in a phrase.
Things that you like. For example, beer.
For example, I want to share with you one new development.
It could be a podcast, for example.
It could be a phrase, actually, or singular words. It doesn't matter. but it gives you an idea how people in real life or in speeches or politicians or whatever, how they pronounce the words, and it can help you to get more exposure to whatever you want, but it shows you only the little bit that you want to focus.
Ah, nice. I mean,
and it is
nice.
also available for German learners, by the
German
way.
learners. Okay.
As a matter of fact, I know that you are learning German as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is correct. Yeah, I am. I started not so many weeks ago because so I'm really, really a beginner. So of course I wouldn't be able to, to hold a conversation right now, but I'm quite confident that in some months I will. I don't know at which level, but I think in some months I will be able to communicate at least on daily matters, daily things, something
Okay.
that you do daily. So,
And
yeah.
what's the plan? So, have you already discovered a good podcast in German, like
Well,
the version in German, Luke's English podcast, maybe Lukas Deutsch podcast, or I don't know.
well, no, not Lucas, but actually there was a guy from that is also a lecturer, and well, basically he has this German podcast that is for, of course, for German learners, and it is called Auf Deutsch gesagt. Well, I started listening to that, but of course it is at a for B2 level and above, so it is quite difficult for me right now. But it is also a really good way for me, or for in order for me to see my improvements, because I tried listening to this podcast like 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago, yesterday, and so I am understanding more and more of the language as the time goes by. The more that I study, the more that I get exposure to the German language, in this case, the more I start noticing things, grammar structures, vocabulary. At the beginning, I was able to understand something like maybe, let's say, 10%, maybe even less of what he was saying. Now I feel like I'm able to understand about 40%, maybe even 50, because in this podcast, he'll really enunciate what he says. So it is quite clear, to understand.
This is really wonderful, because I mean, you just said it, that you are still a beginner, and here you are listening to a B2 German podcast, and now you can understand 50%. I mean, this is incredible. This is really great.
Thank you. I mean, this is something that I can do now because I've got some experience in English learning. So now that I have, studied English to a certain point, and even though I would love, over time to get better and better, I have acquired some experience in language learning. So I know what works for me and what doesn't. Because there are so many things that you can do while studying your target language. There are so many things that you can, apply, that not everything is going to work for you, because we are all different. There are people that, for example, are better when they listen. They are better learner. They understand better. They assimilate the language better when they listen. And then there are people that, for example, are more visual. So in this case, reading is quite important. But in any case, reading is important. So, I mean, we were talking about Stephen Krashen. So, and basically, something that I really liked about one of his videos is that basically what you should do is just make yourself a cup of coffee, of good coffee, pick a book of your target language that is suited to your, to your actual level. Maybe let's say a B1, B2, doesn't matter. And just, start reading to that book. And also, if you have got, the recording of the book, it is even better. Maybe if it is an audiobook with the paperback edition, you can listen and at the same time read the same thing.
Yeah.
And then this is quite powerful. This is quite powerful because if you apply all these different techniques that we have talked about earlier, this is quite powerful. I mean, these are, of course, not my ideas. These are ideas of linguists, polyglots. Many of these ideas are, perpetrated in Luke's English podcast. Luke speaks about them all the time, and he gives plenty of examples and advice on, on how to implement them in your language learning.
Yes, I love that, because by doing so we can just do whatever we want, and at the same time we get better in our target language. In my case, I try to watch movies only in English.
Cool. So, and for example, what kind of movies do you like to watch?
All sort of movies. It could be a crime movie, it could be a horror movie, it could be a thriller, a drama. I have a lot of different tastes. Or it could be a series, a Netflix series.
Let me ask you, because just, we haven't known each other for much time. So I don't know, how did you discover Luke's English podcast?
Well, actually, I can't exactly remember. I always like to just search for any podcast. I just listen into a new podcast and see if I like it. As a matter of fact, I began to listen to podcasts many, many years ago. This was a time in which my friends, they didn't even know what a podcast is.
Yeah, I understand.
So, and there were not that many different podcasts back in the day, and he was one who already had many, many episodes. So he was, I guess, the first podcaster who didn't talk in a unnatural way. I mean, the usual language learning podcast.
Yes.
So
like very slow.
yes, so he was really natural, and I loved that. So I got intrigued and I listened on and off. I mean, I was not listening every year to him. There were gaps in between, because I also love to listen to many other podcasts. So yeah, I like that, to change sometimes my methods or my resources, also to get exposure to different types of English.
Yeah, accents, of course.
Yes.
So yeah, well, basically this is something that I really struggled with, especially at the beginning, because when I was starting basically my journey with the English language, understanding different accents is something that is quite important, because when you switch on the internet, for example, you go on YouTube and use, I don't know, podcast catchers, and you start listening to different people from all around the world, both natives and not. I mean, people that, because there are so many people there that are proficient in English, they are so good that they have their own channel or podcast or whatever. So it is quite, quite important to understand as much, I mean, the most that you can. So you start just by listening to one, and then you work your way up to, to whatever. But it also depends on what kind of accent you are interested in. As for me, for example, I really love the British accent. So this is one of the reasons why I started listening to Luke's English podcast because it is also, as the saying goes, real British English, because it is, embedded in his logo. But I also like other accents. For example, I really love the American accent, but also the American accent is so, there are so many different accents in America.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
it is huge. The same goes for Britain or maybe Australia. So, the internet is a really powerful, really powerful tool, to get exposure to all of this.
Yeah, I wish we had that possibility back then when we were little,
Yeah. And I say, we are quite the same age, I think. Well, basically, yeah. If when I was little, something that I really lacked was, exposure to the language, because where I live, everything is translated in Italian, everything. So the only language that you hear or read here is Italian. If you really want to learn another language, be it, English or German or whatever, you can do it by yourself or by taking classes, but it needs to start from you. If you don't make the effort, you're not gonna go anywhere.
Yes.
So that's the thing.
Thank you so much, Leo. And this was a great sentence to wrap this episode up. I want to thank you very much. This was really interesting, and I'm pretty sure that our listeners can pick a lot of advices from you and implement them into their language learning journey. So thank you very much.
Okay. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
If you want to hear more than just the handful of people I'm talking to over the next few months on this podcast, then why not listen to Daniel Goodson's podcast, which is called My Fluent Podcast. Daniel is an English learner from Switzerland, and he's also a podcaster documenting his journey with English and also interviewing various interesting people who have a lot to say on the subject, including various members of what we are calling the Brave 85. Those Lepsters who didn't make it into the final 16 of the competition. Daniel has been speaking to some of them, and the interviews are really great. You really should listen to them. Tons of advice, insights, and motivation for your learning of English, and just some really great people to listen to.
So this is an excerpt of episode 703 of Luke's English podcast, and I just want to say that this really means a lot to me. So thank you very much, Luke, for your kind words. And Luke, you helped me a lot by reaching out to the Brave 85 or some of them. And this made it possible to make the Brave 85 series. So thank you very much.
I think the first one that Daniel spoke to was Hamid from Pakistan, who's got some really cool things to say. You've got to check out Hamid. He's brilliant. Also, listen to episode 84 of my Fluent podcast, or should I call it Daniel's Fluent podcast, which was with Alvaro from Spain, from Madrid, who was a fascinating person to listen to, all about how he overcame his stuttering. But anyway, very interesting conversation. Also, you must listen to episode 86, which is the Ricky Sandy show, and that's Ricardo from Spain. Do you remember the funny recording that Ricardo sent to me? On that point, actually, listeners, another thing I must say, Ricardo recorded a full-length Ricky Sandy show, and it's up on YouTube. I put it on a listeners page on my website, teacherluke.co.uk.